So I, for one, am really, really pleased that we have Stephen Sterling speaking here. Since I started in this agenda a very long time ago, he has been one of the leaders in the field. I've read his papers, I've read his books. I also have his new book, of which I think you have a few left. Yeah. Which he has a few left if anyone's interested. Cut price, bargain. But Stephen has worked on this agenda. He has been seminal in terms of his work with the UN, amongst many other causes in this field. And because we're so late for time, we'll just hand over. Stephen, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Well, good morning, everybody. I hope this is worth waiting for. So Rachel says she's been working in the area a long time. I wonder if it's as long as me. I've been working in this area about 50 years. And my wife keeps saying, you're supposed to be retired. But people don't let me retire. So here I am again. So I've got quite a lot of slides. I may not use them all, which I know is bad practice, but the way I look at it is I get one shot at this and you've got the slides anyway. And so I might skip some depending on time. And now, are we now short of time?
Let's just see how it goes. I have no idea what the time is. It's 22 minutes past.
Yeah. Okay. So as Rachel said, that I did a book which came out last year, which is called Learning and Sustainability in Dangerous Times. So, I think everybody realizes we are in a very difficult position globally, if not nationally, for all sorts of reasons. These seems very volatile times. And so it sort of raises quite deep questions about learning. What kind of learning do we need for these volatile times, complex times? And what kind of educational systems do we need? So I've been working on that kind of question for years. And my thesis really has been that educational policy and practice doesn't sufficiently take account of overall context. There's a mismatch between practice and policy and the sort of world context, if you like, and the trajectories and trends which are happening. So this goes right back, and I'll start the slides in a moment, but I came into this in 1972, which seems a hell of a long time ago, as an enthusiastic young graduate. And at that time, 1972, it was the time of the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment, the UN Conference on the Human Environment, which led to a lot of discussion globally about, people's relationship to the environment as it was seen then, particularly resources. It's also the time of the Limits to Growth report, which had a huge impact at the time. And there was a flush of environmentalism at that time in the early 70s about, maybe we haven't got this quite right in terms of our development, economic development in relation to the systems. And the UN Conference on the Human Environment was the first conference which identified education as being one means by which we can sort of reorientate things in a more beneficial way. So that was the beginning of a whole discussion about the role of education in relation to these issues, which has gone on for years and years and years and years, and championed by the UN to some extent, but particularly UNESCO. I've done work with UNESCO, and I'll say something about that later. And that debate goes on now, and it's even more urgent, if you like, about is education actually responding to the issues which face us in a sufficiently robust and imaginative way. So let me start. So you'll see a word there which doesn't exist in the English language, or the dictionary at least, responsibility, which is a word I kind of made up. I'll come to it really, but it really means our ability to respond to these conditions. So my argument is that there's that higher education in particular is not yet aligned to the realities of complexity and instability, unsustainability, and the need for rapid socioeconomic transition towards a more livable and safer planet. So I'm not getting a response here. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that'd be helpful. So yeah, 1972 makes me feel really old looking at that. But I walked into a shop in London and found this book on the shelf. Handbook for Environmental Education. So it's the beginning of the whole idea of environmental education at that time. Teaching for Survival. And I thought, well, that's a heck of a title. Because then it was quite a lot of doom and gloom around at that time. And it sort of, it kind of took off on that kind of feeling that there was something radically wrong here. Teaching for Survival. So, I mean, if that title had any kind of validity then I think it really has added validity now, I think. So that quote comes from this book. This book presents this comes from the back cover, I think, presents a way to change the basic assumptions of our educational system, which ultimately leads to the destruction of our natural environment. Well, that's a heck of a title, a heck of a thing to say. So that's 50 years ago plus, and maybe that's still the case in terms of the assumptions behind educational policy and practice. The next one, yeah. So this is a question I've had to myself really for years, and everybody I come across. How should and how can education and learning be rethought and reconfigured to make a significant and central contribution to achieving a more sustainable and just world? Okay, that seems to be a fair enough question to me. And for a long time, I thought that was a sufficient question, but now I think it isn't. I think there's another dimension. So if you go to the next slide, this comes from Paul Raskin, who founded this thing, the Great Transition Initiative, which I'll say more about in a minute. So he said, 2006, the shape of the global future rests with the reflexivity of human consciousness, by which he means the capacity to think critically about why we think what we do, and then to think and act differently. So that's a heck of a challenge. If you're talking about on a planetary level, we have to, in a sense, step outside our frame of reference and critique it and say, if this is insufficient, how can we shift it? And a lot of people have said that. And in the book, I quote a lot of people are saying we need a different way of seeing the world. Next, please. So this is my revised question to myself and everybody else, really. Once the nature of the change of consciousness appears necessary to achieving a safe, more ecologically sustainable and livable society, which can both survive and thrive, and what changes may be required in the way we view and practice education and learning if they are to contribute fundamentally to such a change of consciousness. Okay, so I'll say more about that as we go along. So that's by way of introduction. This is the 4 sections of the presentation, starting with context and challenge. Where are we now? Yeah, thank you. Oops. So, no, that's fine. Thank you. So in the book again, 53 years ago. Yeah, only one Earth. That's when the ideas only one Earth, spaceship Earth, all this kind of thinking came about. Limits to Growth study, which I talked about in the Stockholm conference, all that was bubbling away all those years ago. And now, 50 years plus later, here we are with contemporary books and reports, all of which I'd recommend. This is from the Club of Rome, and the Club of Rome, for all, Survival Guide for Humanity. The Club of Rome was instrumental in commissioning the Limits to Growth report over 50 years ago. And this is about as up to date as you can get, and it's pretty grim stuff, but it's important, leading through not just the poly crisis, but they're saying poly collapse. This is for business particularly, but I think it's got lessons for us in education. A guide to systemic foresight for VUCA, native strategy, VUCA, V-U-C-A. Let me try and remember what it is. It's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This is like this acronym. This is the kind of world we're living in. And that report, hang on, that report says that our institutions are still, including education, are still operating from the pre-VUCA world, if you like, but we're in this different world, but institutions haven't responded sufficiently. Next. This slide I use a lot when I'm doing presentation. I'll just let you read it because I think it's just really, really good. Our way of life is being threatened by a dark force. We must defend our way of life. What is this dark force which threatens our way of life? It's our way of life. Yeah. So this is unsustainability, if you like, thanks to this guy, learning Australian cartoonist. So Beyond the Limits, this came out 1992. 20 years after the Limits to Growth report by the same authors, Donella Meadows and her colleagues. And I put this partly because they define, I think, very succinctly what's meant by a sustainable society. It's one that can persist over generations, one that is far-seeing enough, flexible enough, and wise enough not to undermine either its physical or social systems of support. Well, that's pretty clear. And we're not doing that. And look at you can't see the subtitle probably, but it said Beyond the Limits, Confronting Global Collapse and Envisioning a Sustainable Future. There's a lot of wisdom in that book. Even though it's old, I would recommend looking at that. There's a lot of very useful material in it. And this is why in a way we've not observed the wisdom of 1992. This is a pretty grim graph. This came out 5 days ago, something like that. And I won't go through it, but basically, Johan Rockström is one of the leading authorities on planetary health at Potsdam in Germany. James Black, Assistant Director of the Global Systems Institute at Exeter, just down the road from where I live. And basically saying that we're going past planetary limits thresholds and pushing. And these are missed opportunities where we could have made a fundamental turn. If we keep going, we're heading to a very unpleasant world. And, we've just had the COP30, which was partly successful, but mostly not. We need to make some drastic changes. Okay. Same kind of thing, Global Tipping Points report from Exeter, mostly. But I think if I get this right, 83 scientists in 120 countries contribute to this. Again, talking about going beyond the tipping points in terms of Earth systems. So the reason I talk about this is a bit grim, but it's reality. We have to face reality in our economics, in our business, and other institutions and activities, including education. By the way, the Tipping Points report, if you go online, there's loads of material there which you can use in education. Lots of facts and figures and graphs and so on. Living in a world of systemic polycrisis. So the idea of polycrisis, I'm not quite sure who first came up with it in the 2000s, but basically means all these different issues are highly intermingled. And this comes from the World Economic Forum. And you don't need to look at the detail, but just recognize that these economic, societal, environmental, geopolitical, etc. issues are highly intermeshed. And this was recognized back in 1972 by the Limits to Growth report when they talked about a world problematique. And if you just try and address one problem in isolation, it doesn't do because it has ramifications, systemic knock-on effects on other problems. So you need to look at the thing as a whole. So these issues are systemic. which means, this is a quote from Fritjof Capra, a very well-known systems thinker and physicist, biologist. This comes from his book. Systemic problems means they're all interconnected and interdependent. Ultimately, they must be seen as different facets of one single crisis, a crisis of perception. So this is coming to quite a key point now. So this is worth reading. Most people in our modern society subscribe to the concepts of an outdated worldview, perception of reality inadequate for dealing with our overpopulated, globally interconnected world. Phew. Okay, so it means that we're not seeing things as they are as a society. We still tend to have a narrow vision, a narrow perception, which is not sufficient for dealing with this high level of complexity. Yeah, so it's the Earth from space, of course, and you can't see any divisions here. In a way, the fact that the Earth systems are all one, if you like, is exemplified by a picture from space. And then the quote that's coming up on here, thank you, is from this.
From memory.
Just to, there we go. It's from Donella Meadows, who was involved in all the limits to growth reports, and it's one of my heroes. We've all got people we take inspiration from, and Donella Meadows is certainly one of mine. And she said this in 1982, a long time ago. This is not elegant, but it's true. The world is a complex, interconnected, finite, ecological, social, psychological, economic system. There's all these things at once. We treat it as if it were not, as if it were divisible, separable, simple, and infinite. And then, key point, are persistent, intractable global problems that arise directly from this mismatch. So, it's said a long time ago, and we're still getting it wrong a lot of the time. Okay, they're still on context. So I mentioned the Great Transition Initiative, and they talk about fundamental shifts and trajectories. And they're saying, if you look ahead, they identify three directions that we can go in on a planetary basis. The conventional trajectory, what they call barbarization, where things are breaking down, and then what they call the great transitions to a more safe and secure and ecologically sustainable way of doing things. So, and then that breaks down into 6 subdivisions. So, as you've got this is market forces and shifting policies, tinkering with the status quo, if you like. This one is, I'll read this if you can't see it. A fortress world, powerful international forces enforcing an authoritarian system of worldwide oppression with elites and secured enclaves and impoverished large percentages outside. This is sort of Mad Max stuff, really. But there's some indications that's happening, But also, this kind of life-affirming, rebuilding democracy from the ground up, and restorative, regenerative ideas happening in the green boxes here. So I think these people, which is a think tank, Great Transition Initiative, their view is all these are happening at once. We're not going just down one pathway, we're doing all of them at the same time. So this is in saying what's happening at the grand scale. And I mean, my argument, sorry, I didn't say yes, my argument, go back if you can. Yeah, my argument is that things in a very difficult and dangerous state, and my view is that education and education systems need to be consciously working in the sense of the good, rebuilding local democracy and ecologies and economies at the local level, because these two are not going to hack it. And in fact, they're going to take us over the cliff. So, there's a lot of concern about this. So this guy, you might recognize, he's Antonio Guterres, United Nations General Secretary, Secretary General, I should say. So he held Summit of the Future 2 years ago. which is saying, now, where's the planet going? Where's society going? Can we make a change? The choices we make or fail to make today could result in breakdown or breakthrough to a greener, better, safer future. The choice is ours to make. Yeah, next page. Yeah. So you can argue that to make those sort of changes is really fundamentally a learning challenge. So we can look at learning in three aspects: unlearning habits that got it and ideas that got it to systemic crisis in the first place, relearning more sustainable, life-affirming approaches, and new learning, discovering new ideas and new ways of doing things that can take us towards sustainability and well-being. Yeah. So now you might think, well, you've been going on about this stuff. What about education? Well, I'm getting into education now. So I put this slide up and I've used it a number of times. It's from a seminar being held at Monash in Australia. Monash is a leading university in Australia. And they have this seminar called Learning to Accept Responsibility, the Priority for Education in and Out of Times of Crisis. You have to wait for the signals. So they said this is the same. So what kinds of learning do we need to foster rather than undermine planetary health and community resilience? What is at stake when we don't accept responsibility? Blah, 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 blah. And I thought, great. And you can't argue with that. But if we're saying that now, what have we been doing for the past 30 years in higher education? Yeah. So I have this idea, which I mentioned earlier, about responsibility, which is your ability to respond in the right way, or maybe the ability to respond at all. So I'm talking here at individual level, at institutional level, at national policy level. Yeah. So it's a bit of a lot of text, but another person I've got a lot from is Gregory Bateson, who is a anthropologist and cyberneticist, a systems thinker, and he talked about different levels of learning, which are quite important. And I might say more about it, but the first level of learning is no learning. And this is particularly in relation to higher education now. So, if a university does nothing in relation to these issues, it's not learning anything about them in a way. The second one is some accommodation, but no real change in the system. It's still more of the same. Its next deeper level is reformative. So there's some rethinking of values and policy, which we call second order learning. And then the last one is a sustainability ethos drives purpose, policy, and practice, resulting in fundamental redesign, reflexivity, and organizational learning. So this is deeper and clearly much more difficult to implement. And the deeper you go, the more difficult and more radical the change you're asking for. And I think most universities, a lot of universities have gone beyond nothing to something, and they're around here somewhere, I think. We'll just bash through these, I think, because the time is a bit short. But this is, it'll come up. They'll come up. Just keep clicking. Yeah, and another. Yeah. So some years ago, I made a distinction between education about sustainability, education for sustainability, and what I call sustainable education. So again, a journey, if you like, towards deeper change. And all this stuff is in my book in more details. In more detail. Yeah. I think the main thing for me is these ideas here, bolt on, you just put a few sustainability ideas into curriculum, job done. Well, it isn't, that's not good enough. Build in, which is actually more fundamental, incorporation of sustainability pedagogy and curriculum, or whatever. And this one is redesigned. So that's rethinking the whole thing around more holistic and systemic and ecological kind of ideas. Yeah, next, please. Okay, so that's the first section. Second section, critique. What's satisfactory or unsatisfactory? So this slide is from 2016, and this is, you can see, it's quite a critique. In an increasingly individualistic consumer society, social responsibility gets lost in the noise of markets, financial metrics, rankings, and competition. Well, I don't know what you think, but I think, 2016, we've moved on a bit since then. It's not quite that bad, maybe. But the sort of marketization and commodification of higher education, partly pushed by the whole neoliberal agenda from the last 30 years, I would say, has deflected the more collaborative ethos of universities used to have. Okay, so what's happening? Well, we're getting a lot of demand from students, of course, which is a lever on policymakers. Students Organising for Sustainability has been doing their skills survey for years now, and each time they find about 80% of students nationally want their institutions to be doing more. Which is interesting. So that's quite an important lever on policy. Yeah, next. And then at the international level, there's been a lot going on to try and rethink education policy and practice in the light of sustainability issues. So as I said, I've done quite a lot of with work with UNESCO. They had a major report come out in 2016. This document, Education for Sustainable Development, a roadmap, that's still good till 2030. And just read that quote there. They're talking about the need to change education. And then I love this quote from Assistant Director General of Education for UNESCO. We are increasingly asking if what people learn is truly relevant to their lives, if what they learn helps us to ensure the survival of our planet. Good question. So UNESCO then put together a thing called the International Commission on the Futures of Education, which is still running, the Futures of Education. You can check this out. And they came up with quite an interesting report. But if you look at the last quote, particularly, education systems often reproduce and perpetuate the very conditions that threaten our shared futures, limiting education's potential to be truly transformative. Okay, so here we have a bit of a conundrum. So education is being identified as a means to assure a safer future, but it needs to change in order to do that. So it needs to be transformed in order to be transformative. So that's the issue. That's the issue, if you like. Next. UNESCO, the UN put this summit together a few years ago. Again, these kind of quotes: the crisis in education requires us to fundamentally rethink its purpose and curricula. And that initiative is still going on. There's people meeting to discuss where that's going. And then the next one, I think, this one. So this is still the Futures of Education initiative. And an interesting quote from that one too. That was held last December. We face an existential choice between continuing on an unsustainable path or radically changing course. And then the key line here, in my view, education is crucial to this change of course. Yet education itself must be transformed. So again, this conundrum the whole time. How do we sort this one out? Next. So there's nothing new about this. Okay, one of the few benefits of getting old is I remember what happened a long time ago. So who's heard of Schumacher? E.F. Schumacher. Yeah, a few. So Schumacher was famous in his day for writing a book called Small as Possible. Um, so if you just do another quote there. So he's saying education is not the answer unless we have a different sort of education. Keep clicking. Yeah. If still more education is to save us, it would have to be education of a different kind, and education takes it to the depth of things. So he said that in 74. So this argument is not new, if you like, but it's becoming more immediate now, and people are recognizing that we need to actually address this fundamentally. On the thing that's not new, this is 1991, and this comes from a book called The Systems Design of Education, where the author, Banafé, says we should create learning that enhances critical thinking, the understanding of the self, the systems and environments in which we live, and the situations we experience. Understand and manage complexity, ambiguity, uncertainty. These are all the things which this VUCA world is saying we now need to grapple with all these years later. So I put this cartoon in because I like it, basically. But, this is a bit of a critique, but, here's the teacher saying, A leads to B, and they say, okay, fine, this is 6 o'clock. It's not like that. It's much more complicated. And we're still saying, no, the world's actually like this, really. And it isn't. It is in small cases, but overall it's not. Yeah. Okay, so that leads us to this situation, another lovely cartoon. So here's all these people, here's the answer to your issues, simple but wrong. And off they go. And a few people going complex, but brave people saying, okay, it's a windy road, complex but right. Now, how do we get education to take people more into that sphere rather than that one? Okay. So, vision. So, I sort of set it up now. So, how can we actually move forward? How are we doing for time?
No one got the time.
5 to 11.
5 to 11 minutes. Yeah.
Keep going. All right.
Yeah. Please.
Okay, so onto the sort of vision bit, really. So here's a good question: what is education for? And just a little story. I gave a lecture to 300 teacher training students up in Scotland some years ago. 300 of them sitting there. And I started off with a big question mark on the board and said, what is education for? Dead silence. They just done 4 years training on how to be a teacher. And then a few brave souls put their hand up. But it's fundamental. What are we doing here? What's it for? So, my view is basically 4 functions. One is socialization, which has always been the case, and it's true in indigenous societies too. Vocational, so employability and so on. The liberal humanist function is developing the whole person and bringing out their potential and so on. And the 4th one is making a better world, if you like. This has been kind of forgotten in the past 30 years. This is where I came in when I was training. This is in the ascendancy. So we're largely down to this and this, an economistic view of education. This one's forgotten altogether, and that's been suppressed. My view is, if you click it again, keep clicking. Keep clicking. Yeah, my view is we need to urgently work towards this, not forgetting the other 3, because they're all important, but bring them into a broader framework. That's my view. Okay, so this leads to the key question about the purpose of education. As it was in the past, as it is in the present, as it should be, up for discussion, as it could be. So it's got to be radical, but it's got to be practicable. And I'm not such sort of idealistic visionary. We can just jump into a new state tomorrow. We can't. So what's practicable? It's another issue for discussion. And this is one of my little models here. And I've talked about purpose very quickly, but beneath purpose is the paradigm, which is fundamental values informing your view of education, what it is and what it should be. That roughly to your sense of purpose, which leads to your sense of policy and provision and practice. And my argument, if you just click, Susan, my view, if you just change a few things up here without changing purpose and policy, let alone paradigm, it's like building an eco house on unsupported foundations. So we need more than a few tweaks to the curriculum because there's more fundamental questions that need to be addressed. Okay, so which leads me to the whole question of worldviews. This, interestingly, comes from a business journal some years ago. Again, interesting title for this paper, Developing Leaders for a World of Uncertainty, Complexity and Ambiguity, those words again. So these are business writers, and they're saying there's fundamentally two orientations we can talk about. One is the mechanistic analytical orientation here, which is coherent in itself. But the other one is the ecological, holistic, systemic, whatever you want to call it, version here, which is about complexity. Really. And I think this is really important, and it informs a lot of my work. And what I'm not saying is forget this. I'm not saying forget that, but this is how we're educated in this box here, basically. This is what we're good at. We're not good at this, but this is where we need much more emphasis. And this Fritjof Capra I mentioned talks about a shift of attention. That's the word he uses. He's not saying forget this, because this has application in specific circumstances. It's not good at dealing with issues of complexity and uncertainty. So that's where we need more flexible thinking and approaches. Okay. So this leads me to this one, just quickly, because time is short. But, these are the things we're good at. These are the things we're taught within this kind of framing. And this is where we need more ecological, more integrative, more systemic ways of seeing and doing. And if you do another little, yeah, there we go. So some years ago, I was involved in developing systems thinking stuff for schools mostly, but material. And we came up with the metaphor of the box and the web. And we have the metaphor that, this is box thinking, if you like, bordered. And this is web thinking, where things interrelate. And you look at feedback and systemic consequences and all that sort of thing. Okay, so if you take that worldview argument, it tends to have implications of how we structure and do education. So this is, this tends to be the old-fashioned but still current to some extent model of doing things, and this is the more holistic model there. Okay, so and these are hopefully this is self-explanatory. Again, it's a shift from one way of doing it to another, where this again has some validity in some situations, but it's not good enough to prepare us for a rapidly changing world. Yeah. Okay. So this gets a bit deep at this point. Keep going. Yeah. So we all know the values, understanding, and skills triad, which is current in a lot of educational theory and practice. And without going into a lot of detail, which is explained in my book, really, but basically, I think there's three fundamental shifts to get us to think more systemically. And the first one is this expanding. You remember Capra talked about a crisis of perception. So the first one is expanding our perception. So most people, you say, what do you care about? You say, well, I care about my wife and my dog, really. They don't go beyond that. Other people have concern about their community. Other people have concern about the whole planet. So how can I get a broader, what's called a system of concern? It's about context, looking beyond the immediate, and maybe looking into the future too. The second one is conception, understanding pattern, consequence, connectivity, feedback, flows, all that sort of thing. Having a much better sense of understanding, because reality is not in boxes. And it all relates, like the was it the polycrisis diagram I showed some slides ago. So this is a more fluid way of seeing and understanding, and doing the ability to think, design, and act relationally, integratively, and wisely. So there's more and more emphasis on education, which is looking at the quality of relationships in order to promote well-being, both in the self and in the community and in nature. Yeah. Oh, okay. So it's getting a bit too much stuff, isn't it, really? Yes, I think I'll skip that one because of time, but it's an expanded, I'm calling expanded explorative educational paradigm is what's needed. I don't really have time to explain that in detail. So, yeah, coming on to the last section now. So how do we enact change? I'll just take a break for a second. So part of this is, so I worked at the University of Plymouth for 12 years. I was very lucky to be part of a unit of, at its height, it was 9 people, charged with transforming the university. Well, I'm not sure the senior management understood what they were signing up to, really. But we were trying to get systemic change ideas into the way the university ran, shifts in the curriculum and in pedagogy, but also linking up with campus management and so on. And it occurred to us during that time, but also looking at what's going on around the world, that to get a really strong response, not a superficial response, actually means the university itself has to learn. You know, the staff have to learn, senior management definitely have to learn, all staffs have to learn. And I'll come to that in a second. So if you ask what sustainability means in universities, people say, oh, we need to change the curriculum or whatever. So that's curricular learning. Yeah, fine, that's good, that's needed. But click. It also demands organizational learning. So it means if you look at a university, they define themselves as teaching organizations and research organizations. Well, they also need to be learning organizations. Now, the idea of a learning organization came from business, not from universities, because business recognized they need to learn in order to keep up with the competition and whatever. So that concept of a learning organization came from business, but it needs to be applied to universities, who are struggling to keep up with the rapid shifts in society. And these two things relate. We need more of this in order to get good stuff going on here. And the universities internationally, which have done really well on all this, are in that sphere too. Yeah. Okay, so it also has implications for, again, deeper learning, and it has so many implications here, which I don't think I have time to go through. But I mean, if you get nothing else in this slide, it's that most learning in universities are or have been for years, maybe not so much now. It's first order learning. Here's material, you learn it, and that's it. You don't necessarily question it. This is questioning us, looking at assumptions and values informing this in the first place. So we get deeper learning taking place, whether it's in the curriculum or in the organization. So there's a difference between doing things better and doing better things. That's one way of putting it. And this is seeing things differently. This is epistemic change that informs the whole university, which is tough. But that's the direction we should be going in. Next. Oh yeah. So yeah, people maybe less sympathetic than you might say that's all very well you saying this stuff, Stephen, but look at all the barriers. And they're real. There's no point in denying it. But I always think there's possibilities of change. However small, micro changes can lead to meso changes, can lead to macro changes eventually. And we trotted this out, at Plymouth for 12 years. So I know it can be done, and we came up against barriers for sure. Okay. So this is kind of mapping. If you take the whole sustainability and VUCA world stuff, conventional response is here. I hope you can read that. It's okay. It's okay. It's all right. It's limited, but it's insufficient if that's where things stop. If this is a first step, great. If it's the only step, not great. So this is a accommodative response, and this is a more transformative response, where we have a much more explorative and expanded view of the role of education in the university. So this, as I said, is a learning journey, back to learning organization ideas. Yeah. Okay, so I think this is self-explanatory, really. There's still too much of this going on. How do we get more towards this more connected way of being and doing? I like this idea of being a microcosm of the unsustainable society, a microcosm of a more sustainable society. Okay, so this is just sharing some learnings that we had at Plymouth over the years. These are some of the things we found. The ingredients, if you like, of making quite deep change in the culture of the university. And we did recognize it was a cultural change. It wasn't just curriculum and research or whatever. It was fundamentally a cultural shift we were trying to implement with a degree of success. This is quite important, developing sustainability collective intelligence. Somebody needs to hold that idea of what's going on where and build on it. Okay, yeah, responsibility. So there's three aspects really. The emotional response, so people need to be engaged, inspired, and motivated. Otherwise, nothing will happen. You need to be able to get it, understand it, and be able to do something. And this is tricky, trying to get senior management to get it sometimes is quite difficult. You have to make kind of arguments why they should do more than they maybe do. Yeah. Okay, so where are we now? 2022. So myself and two colleagues were asked to put together a special issue of a journal called Frontiers in Sustainability. And it's become an ebook now. And we had 24 papers on the theme of the ebook was repurposing universities for sustainable human progress. And we had some really good papers, both theoretical and practical, come in. And it's all online. If last time I looked at it, it had 216,000 hits on it, which to me is an indication that there's a hunger for inspiration, for change, for ideas, and for good practice across the world, if you like. And this comes from our editorial, and it's quite a strong quote here. The question of reimagining and repurposing higher education for sustainable human progress is a challenge that all stakeholders, including academics, students, policymakers, and those in business and the media, need to embrace fully if collectively we are to ensure a future beyond the apocalyptic one in prospect. So it's a strong statement. And these are some of our 5 conclusions from editing that book. Yes, thanks, Susan. Okay, so there's a lot of emphasis on competences and skills in this field. And my question has always been, how are we doing for time, Rachel?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think we're at 11:10.
Right. Okay. Good. So the question is, okay, competences and skills, which is fine. And a lot of work on that. I'll say something about that in a minute. But the question is, for what? Skills for what? Competencies for what? So this, in a way, helps answer that. So there's now a lot of discussion, as I'm sure you're aware, about regenerating communities, regenerating economies, and local ecologies, and so on. So this is just one slide which I found. So these are the issues: degradation of ecosystems, depletion of resources, inequality, disease, etc. How can we move towards these aspects of well-being? So this again goes right back to the Great Transition slide when we talked about green futures, if you like green scenario at the bottom of that slide. So this gives us something to get our teeth into, if you like, as educators. Yeah. So this is a slide I wrote some time ago. So here's regenerative systems. And these are maybe some of the qualities which we need to develop in our students. Yeah. So questions of pedagogy, which are much more explorative, much more dynamic, and much more personally affecting than traditional transmissive pedagogies. These are some of the aspects. And then this is a thing called Green Comp, which I was involved with a lot of other people across Europe a few years back. It's an EU project. And they came up with these 12 competencies, which I think is a good work. It was a shared consultancy. We all pitched in on Zoom calls and whatnot for over a year, and this is the result. And you can go on that Green Comp site, and there's a lot more detail there. And I think it's useful. It's a really useful piece of work. And it's not just for schools; it's universities. It's for the public at large too. That's the point they make. Okay, so now I'm going to finish by giving just a few frameworks which may be useful to you, which can be used in any kind of teaching context. It's asking questions really about any particular issue. And I've got all these descriptors, what is it, 8 or so, questions that can be asked to get people to think outside the box, if you like, in a more connective way, and ask them deeper questions about what's going on here, what could go on, what's going on, whose interest is it in, and so on. Okay, so that's that set. And then this one is appraising curricula or policy statements or whatever, and these 5 questions, or is it 5? Yeah. All conveniently starting with C. Context, congruence, criticality, commitment, and contribution. Because it's just tools which may or may not be useful to you in your work. And then this is something I did, goodness knows how many years ago now. Is it 2010 or something? Anyway, I was working for the Higher Education Academy, and they wanted me to put guidance together for staff. And it's not for people who are already down the line on sustainability education, but people who, more staff who said, well, I know this is important, but what's it got to do with me? And how do I get started anyway? That's the people I wrote it for. So it's called the Future Fit Framework, an introductory guide for teaching and learning for sustainability in higher education. So again, it's just a framework tool. So what if you're looking at a curriculum statement, whatever it is, what is the value that we need to keep, retain that? What might need a modification, revise that? What might we need to abandon, reject that? And what new ideas might we need to renew? So this is a kind of thing you could use in staff training kind of exercises. Okay. So then, is this seeing the academic as a change agent which we were at Plymouth, and overtly so, with the blessing of senior management. And these are some ways of articulating what we were doing, if you like, in the work we were doing over, well, initially 5 years, and that stretched with less funding for another 7 years. And then my book, quick plug. If you're interested in this work, my thinking, there's the book. David Orr, he's a famous American writer, and I've known him for some years. It's been my privilege to be so. He wrote the foreword. Well, look, that's the end. That's some key websites, and that's my website, which I need to update, but there's an awful lot of stuff on it, but I do need to update it a bit. And then I don't know if there's time for discussions, but these kind of questions I put up when I'm doing workshops and stuff. But you might want to just have a chat. I don't know. How's the time?
We're now at 11:16. What I suggest maybe we do, these, if we're left with these, we can actually work through them. Because I think they're really important. That's an important part of digesting everything that you've told us. I'm wondering whether there are questions. Are there any people got questions? Yeah.
Can I just first apologise for galloping through it? I felt slightly constrained by the delayed start.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of material. And I'm sorry if some of it went too fast, but there's a lot of stuff you can unpick maybe later.
Yeah. Brilliant.
So I hope it makes some sense anyway. But there's a lot of stuff there, if you like, in a concentrated, undiluted form. Yes, at the back first. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really interesting. So, Joanne Tippett. I was also very inspired by David Orr and his concept of the pedagogy of place.
Yes.
And it's one of the things that it feels like a constant uphill battle to look around us and say, what is the pedagogy of this place? What are we teaching about sustainability from our campus? And I'm intrigued if you managed to get any breakthroughs in the physical design of your campus at Plymouth through this work and what the impact that had.
Okay, so if you go to Exeter, I'm not avoiding the question. If you go to Exeter, it's a wonderfully green, verdant, huge campus. Plymouth is stuck on the corner. It's in a city, basically. This is glorious compared to what. But so we've had to make the best of a small space, basically. So we've done that. So we've got gardens. I'm not sure they're still there. We were keeping bees. That was good. We've got stuff on rooftops, and so for outdoor space, it's pretty limited. But I think the estates have done the best they can, and they took a little while. I mean, as ever, they took a little while to understand the learning potential of the estate. It wasn't their priority. So when I talk about learning organization, part of that was talking to estates over a long period to get them to realize that was really a key part of the wider curriculum, and now we've got somebody who's head of estates who's right on board and working with students. So that would never have been the case years ago, So it's just building these connections over time. And I think there was another issue where a new building was being suggested, and then people in the architecture school said, "Well, why don't you talk to our students?" So making that link, it should be obvious, but it isn't.
Yeah.
So universities are really like this, aren't they? They really connect like this. And if I summarize our work over years, we were doing this all the time, going across ways all the time. Making links.
We have a few questions online as well.
Yeah, and couple more in the room. Yeah. Jenny, I hope you can talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me in the room?
Yes. Yep.
First of all, thank you for including us in this and making it possible for us to join online. It was a really, really fascinating and inspiring session. My question is really, you've talked a great deal about higher education, but obviously the majority of the population never reach higher education. I work in further education, which especially under the new curriculum review and the new inspection framework, I was thinking about your slide about what's education for. And further education is almost exclusively focused on that vocational function, preparing people for work. And in the new inspection framework, unless we've had an employer say that this is important to include in the curriculum, we're supposed to forget about it. It's supposed to be all about employability. So I wondered if you had any recommendations or thoughts about that compulsory education below university level, and any tips or ideas about bringing some of these thoughts and making change in that space.
Well, I don't have any particular expertise in further education, I should say, but I think there's a couple of observations. One is, if you look at what employers look at qualities that employers want, there's quite a lot of evidence that they want people who can work cooperatively, and quite a lot of expectation. They can think outside the box, and people can work. What should I say? Work flexibly, I think, and work in teams. That's the other thing. So there's a whole mode of expectation there. If you look at employers' requirements, I'm not expressing it very well, but that is true. Secondly, I think if you take almost any trade, it's possible to look at systemics involved in that, if you like. So, I mean, I'm going back to HE, if you like, because I'm now thinking of a course we had at Plymouth, which is in nursing. So the staff there started a completely innovative course on the environmental effects of nursing and equipment use. So it blossomed into a whole big project which went across Europe, because people thought they hadn't even started to look at that, and also the implications of nursing in a warming world. That was another part. So, I mean, I would say, I mean, resourcing, whether it's hairdressing or building trades or whatever, where the resource is coming from, where they're going to, you start looking at systemic effects. So, and I think also just building on students' interests, I just think you'll get a richer education by just pushing the boundaries where you can, if you like, and given that the NUS research on students' desires for their institutions to have much more sustainability content, because they're much more aware than their staff half the time. I would have thought that applied to FE too. So I don't think all students will be interested, but I think a lot are, and concerned about their futures. So I think it's maybe in your situation, it's actually boxing clever a little bit and seeing where the opportunities are, and then pushing them where you can. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we had other questions. Lydia, did you want to? Oh, and Sandra.
No, Mark, I was in Mark online. Yes, Mark as well.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to go Mark first?
Yeah. Thank you so very much, Stephen, for the very, very insightful presentation. Listening to you, you did mention different types of learning. You mentioned the curricular learning, and you mentioned the organizational learning. And I'm very much interested in the organizational learning. And I was wondering, and given the fact that we are all part of this wonderful, fantastic university doing amazing things within the context of sustainability, And yet we have different research interests, different responsibilities, and sometimes we operate at within silos in a very specific individualistic level. And I was wondering in your work if you've come across anything that can incentivize organizational learning or social learning. Yeah, I think that's my first question. And then my next question, you mentioned something about, I think you brought this analogy of the box and spider or system thinking. And under the box, you mentioned dualism as an aspect of the kind of a box style of thinking. And under the spider system, I think you mentioned duality or plurality. And I was wondering, what is the distinction between dualism and plurality? With respect to dualism, are you alluding to groupthink, for instance, or there is a special connotation attached to that?
There are two questions. Okay. Okay. So just quickly, at Plymouth, we were lucky. We had some funding. So we had what we call centre fellows right across the university who had a small amount of funding to take sustainability forward in their schools. And what was good about that is because they had this title of centre fellows, that gave them legitimation to come together. We had a lot of groups meetings together where they exchanged information and ideas and innovation, what they were doing, but being supported by their peers who were in completely different schools, completely different departments. So we got a lot of organizational learning from breaking down the barriers, and having events of all sorts, having outside speakers and whatever. And that was really, really helpful. We also had a sustainability advisory group which met regularly, and all aspects of the university operation were represented on that advisory group. So that was really important because that got all kinds of exchange of information and group think, if you like, on issues which affected the university. So again, that was ongoing organizational learning, which then fed into the senior management and downwards again. So there's ways of creating structures by which you can encourage organizational learning. That's what I'm saying. There were two ways we did that. Also most importantly, involving the student body at the same time. So they're also a key part of that forum. It was a forum. The other question was about dualism and duality, I think. Dualism is like particularly in relation to things like environment and economy, and present and future, and male and female, and us and them, and all that sort of stuff. All those dualities are part of the Western way of thinking, if you like. And from dualism, we need to go to duality. What do I mean by duality? It's because in dualism, it's quite philosophical, this stuff. In dualism, we tend to see these things as opposites, particularly environment and economy. Particularly environment and economy, seen as opposite. In duality, the best way of explaining duality is the Chinese yin-yang concept. When you have yin and the yang, which are complementary. So duality is complementarity, which is about relationship. Okay, so that's a highly different way of seeing things. Instead of seeing opposites in tension, it's seeing the synergies between binaries. Okay, so that's completely different way of seeing things. So in terms of economy and ecology, they need to be seen as complementary, and how do they best relate to each other? Okay, there's a difference between duality and dualism. I hope that helps. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Lydia, do you want to?
Stephen, you've mentioned student groups as students organising for sustainability, and you mentioned Student Union. I'm wondering, last week, the Student Union here set up a a new group or is in the process of setting up a new group, possibly of people and planet across the
Yeah.
university departments, which has already brought together students from lots of different departments.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, here you've got you've got structures, which is the structure I work in, which is my trade union. My trade union is the trade union of the staff. The student union are the students' union. And I'm wondering, what's your experience of working with union groups?
I don't have experience. I can't really talk to that.
Right.
I can't really talk to that.
Or perhaps you and I should have a conversation because there's lots going on.
Yeah. I mean, unions as opposed to individuals.
No, I mean unions as unions who have green reps
Yeah,
in the workplace. And
Yeah. I would have colleagues or ex-colleagues who answer that a lot better than me. Yeah.
I'd be glad to talk to them.
Yeah.
Alison online. Alison has
Yeah.
her
Okay, Alison?
Yeah, she said she can't speak, but yeah.
I think the question was about universities and universities that are doing really good work, and whether you could recommend any
Okay,
who are doing the outstanding.
what universities across the world are leading lights, holistic and interdisciplinary and radiating educating sustainability?
Well, I'm not necessarily up to date on what's happening now. I was. I'm trying to be retired. But, I mean, ones that come to mind are Chalmers in Sweden and University of British Columbia in Canada, Arizona in the States.
You mentioned Monash.
Monash, in Australia. I mean, what I would say is look at the International Green Gowns Award for that. Green Gowns for UK, but also the International Green Gowns Award. And there's a lot of exemplars there, and you can look at the track record of those that have won those over the past few years, really. I mean, the other source to some extent. I mean, I used to be on the UNESCO EST Japan Prize until a few years ago, and we had applications from some universities, and some of it was just stunningly good. So though I've been critical here, I think necessarily so, I'm not. I'm fully cognizant there's some really good work going on. Anyway, which is and more so actually too. So I'm partly worried about the progress and partly heartened by the amount of new stuff which is happening all the time. You know, when I did that book, you do research for a book, obviously, and I did the research, came across more and more examples and initiatives of good things happening, which is encouraging, and you have to really take heart from that, I think.
We are at time, but I think we've got more questions for you. Do you want to just give out your question? So if you say your question, and Alex, if you want to give your question, and then we'll maybe be able to squeeze all the answers in.
Well, my question is, I recently worked on the topic called the post-truth age, which means people no longer believe the data is the science. And somehow the sustainability is like mostly related to data science. And because of the social media, there's so many people out there and there's so much information out there posted by someone, quote unquote expert, but this data or we say truths are out of nowhere. And there are even some conspiracies that even some people today, they believe that the earth is flat and or even the COVID is totally it doesn't even exist. And this thing is totally like propaganda trick, something like that. And I think if we are doing this education, we need to make sure this data or those examples at least it's true. It's not fake, but authorization doesn't 100% equal to truth. So it's very hard for this generation, our generation, to recognize, to verify the data is truth or fake.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a worrying state of affairs when there are interest groups apparently which are trying to undermine fundamentally grounded data, which should be incontrovertible. And because there are vested interest groups, as you know, quite powerful interest groups on them, which are working for disinformation and have been for years. And they have money and they have power. And what I would say is you need to check your sources very carefully and go to internationally recognized sources and research groups. So, look at, for example, I've been quoting the Global Systems Institute at Exeter, just down the road from where I live, which does tremendous work. It's irrefutable. You can't actually, you can't say in any way that's been compromised, that work. So the Global Tippings Report, as I said, was written by 83 scientists from over 120 institutions. Well, that's about as valid as you can get. So be careful of your sources. I mean, there's newsletters from people like like UNEP, United Nations Environment Programme. That's really very good. There's a lot of material there. Another one I'd really recommend is the Stockholm Resilience Institute. The Stockholm Resilience Institute is really good. They've got first-class research there. It's all there online. You can look at that stuff, and so on. I think you can find reliable resources quite easily and be very wary of stuff you're not sure of its provenance. That's all I can say, really. But yeah, it's tough.
We're over time. One last question, Alex.
Very quickly, I'm interested in your thoughts briefly about education and learning beyond the formal setting.
Well, but that's a good question, and I, to some extent, you can argue that that education outside the formal sector is much more nimble and agile and able to shift more quickly than formal education because of all the structures involved. There's an organization called Lifelong Learning, which is based in Europe, which promotes lifelong learning, funnily enough. But it's also taking this agenda on board, and it's got networks all across Europe to take this further. But I'm also encouraged by the whole relatively new emphasis on regeneration. There's a lot going on in a community level on regenerating community and local nature and ecosystems. So particularly in relation to local growing, for example, and I'm personally involved in a thing called local energy scheme. And that's really interesting. So there's lots of stuff going on, which is trying to build resilience and reliance at a local level, which I think is really interesting. And it's partly because it's good to do, because you're building community and you're enjoying life by doing stuff together. And it's partly, I think, more negatively, with this possible breakdown in mind. We have to get on and do what we can, because if we're relying on governments, we're probably going to be waiting a long time. Yeah.
Right. Should we give Stephen a round of applause?
Yeah, thank you for your interest. Thanks for your interest, and I hope it sparked a few ideas, and good luck in